Welcome to Raise and Deploy, a podcast dedicated to international investments with insights from the world's leading investment professionals from New York to Timbuktu. Each episode, we bring on a new guest to discuss the trials and tribulations that occur when seeking substantial returns in foreign markets. We cover the full life cycle of an investment, from the moment you contemplate raising capital offshore to the final check cashed on the returns. Today, I'm with Saller of Spectra Investments to talk about search funds and how they work. We discuss their history and what he looks for when deploying capital into search funds. We also go deeper into one of his biggest wins, a 33xer in 5 years. Let's begin. Alex, welcome to Raise and Deploy. I'm really excited about this opportunity to speak with you. I had a great conversation with Renato and Jamie a few weeks ago, and search funds came up, and it just resonated with me so much as an entrepreneur, thinking about how we could potentially utilize these types of things to, grow our company and within our ecosystem. I just thought it was such an innovative idea, and I hadn't heard about it before. So, as a resident Spectra expert on search funds, I'd love to get your thoughts on it, and we're going to go into it like a normal conversation, but really excited to get your thoughts. And once again, welcome.
Awesome, Ashley. Nice to meet you, and it's a pleasure to be here. I think we're all very enthusiastic about search funds and the asset class as a whole. So it'll be great to share a little bit about what we've learned throughout the last years.
Perfect. All right. Well, let's get into the 101. What is a search fund?
Yeah, so that's the question we get most of the time when we mention the term search fund. For a search fund, essentially is a model that was created in the United States around the 1980s, 1990s, where a recently graduated MBA student decides that they want to, become an entrepreneur, but instead of running the full risk of starting a new business from scratch, they're looking to acquire a company and, what they call entrepreneurship through acquisition. So they look for investors who are interested in their profile and who they maybe know from prior endeavors in their careers or not, who are willing to fund this process called the search, where this individual or a couple eventually will look for a company to acquire control of this company and eventually become full-time CEO or co-CEOs of this target and operate it for a period which generally ranges from 5 to 10 years.
Okay, really interesting and a really good summary of that. It sounds similar to a SPAC, but obviously it's not. Can you elaborate on some of the differences there?
Yeah, so that's also a common question. I'd say that the main difference starts that, a search fund can be started by almost anyone, while SPACs are typically sponsored by, seasoned professionals who are well-known or relatively well-known to the public. And SPACs are also generally raised through an IPO, while search funds are raised privately. And then on the other side, you also have the aspect where search funds are generally looking to acquire small to mid-sized companies, where SPACs are designed to target larger companies. And lastly, in SPACs, sometimes the team that leads the SPAC will be involved directly in the management of the company, but will not become, I'd say, full-time CEO. Whereas in search funds, the model requires, and it's kind of like the holy grail of the model is the searcher leaving everything behind, sometimes having to pack their backpack and moving to somewhere they never imagined to live before, and becoming full-time CEO of the companies.
Very interesting. You mentioned a couple of times there about people. That's my next question. Who makes the perfect person to go through it? You mentioned young, hungry, entrepreneurial, out of school. What else are you looking for in the person that's going out there and picking these companies?
So we generally try to keep an open mind on on their careers, prior to their MBA. I'd say there's a general trend. Obviously, when you look at business schools, there is a more limited amount of careers when you look at the general trend. So people that have experience in private equity or consulting or investment banking. But we at Spectra, we also really like the more operational profile. People that have gone to the grit and grind of going into the operations of companies. So people that have worked as eventually COOs or members of operational departments. But at the end of the day, much more than their prior experience, what we're looking for is profile, is that hunger, is that, that capacity to lead. That is something that is very clear that you can see in searchers when they have or do not have that drive, which is what many times, more than the company they're actually acquiring, is what we believe will define if they're successful or not in their endeavor.
Interesting. So obviously passion has to be a part of that as well. How much is that kind of that experience combined with the passion to kind of drive change in an industry or solve a problem that needs to be solved, taken into consideration as well? How important is that?
I'd say it's 100% important. Curiously, I actually went to Babson College undergraduate, where they're very known for their entrepreneurship program. And after 4 years, I learned that you can train entrepreneurship, but you have to be born with it. So, the passion and the will to change things and to really disrupt, once again, is sometimes more important than the company. This is much more a people business rather than a deal business. Obviously, maintaining the main parameters that we're looking for in terms of financials and potential returns when we're analyzing investment deals.
Love it. Really inspiring stuff. I'm sure a lot of people that are listening to this that have gone through schooling, education, working really hard for companies, and getting that the lack of opportunity or the lack of reward for the work that they put in, and knowing that they could have made a big change if given the bandwidth to do so, are going to be listening to this and thinking, wow, what an opportunity that could potentially behold them for themselves. That's really exciting. All right, so we've gone into a little bit about who sets these up, but talk to me a little bit about the structure of a search fund. What is it? Is it a fund? Is it a partnership?
Yeah, so a search fund generally has two phases. The initial phase, which is called the search phase, is where the searcher, which is the term that we call these individuals or duos that are looking to raise the fund, they go around to their potential investors, with their proposals, saying, listen, we're trying to search for a company in this country or in this region of a specific country, sometimes with a more industry-focused scope, but generally not. Generally, they're more agnostic in terms of sectors. And in this process, generally, there's not a specific number, but searchers are looking to raise something around $500,000, which are broken between X number of units. So let's assume it's 10 units. They're looking for 10 units of $50,000, which is going to be the capital that they're going to use to finance that search process, which is a process that generally takes somewhere between 1 to 2 years, which includes, hiring a small team of 1 to maybe 3 interns, maybe having a small office, or nowadays, there's so much home office or co-working spaces that also work. Screening the markets that they're targeting, reaching out to the potential companies, finding the companies they're actually interested in, and then conducting the financial, legal due diligence, etc., negotiating the contracts, the SPAs, and that's what we call the search phase, which is phase 1. Generally structured through some sort of limited partnership or an LLC. Nothing very complex there. And then once the company is identified, the investors, they have, the option to invest, but not the obligation. So say you bought one of 10 companies, and the searcher presents to you an opportunity that is $10 million, your pro rata would be $1 million, 10% of that opportunity. And you have the option, but once again, not the obligation to invest. And then depending on the company, you can decide if you want to put up your pro rata of the deal, if you do not want to participate at all, or if you really like the opportunity, you can say, hey, I want to go to up to as much as this. And that gives a lot of flexibility amongst the investor base to be able to adjust their check size to according to their appetite for specific transactions. And then once the searcher is able to, close this cap table and make sure that everyone is allocated what they specifically want to have, then they eventually, sometimes they won't get to the official target, and then they're allowed to go outside of their investor base and look for other potential investors to complete the check. And then at that point, the transaction is closed. And then the searcher basically becomes CEO full-time and starts being compensated as the CEO of the company. And, sometimes the kind of like the search shell still exists, but everything then operates through a special purpose vehicle, an SPV, which is created for that specific acquisition.
Really interesting. There's so many questions that are coming out of this for me now. I'll try and get them in order for you. You mentioned there was a range that occur, right? So, but surely you must have some sort of idea as to kind of what this budget is going to be to acquire one of these companies. What is there a maximum to the amount that you're looking to buy?
So that's I'd say there's a general guideline, which would be, an equity raise of something between $5 and $20 million. Which would imply buying companies that have, revenues of something between maybe $10 and $50 million. But there are a lot of exceptions, both in the US as well as other countries in the world. We've seen some exceptions to the rule, which is something normal. But I'd say that it's becoming more often. Given some dynamics, specifically as the asset class grows, as investors become more confident in flexibilizing their approach.
I think also, which is really interesting as well, with the lack of exits that we've seen, there's an opportunity now to find new ways and more innovative ways of getting companies, investors whole and ultimately keeping these valuations going. So it seems to be an interesting way of making opportunities out of a down market potentially, right?
Yeah, I think the search fund is really focused on companies that maybe have a succession issue where there's a founder that wants to retire and doesn't have the next generation, or for any given reason wants to sell their business. But given the size of the business, small to mid-sized companies, these are companies that they do not have, obvious strategic or financial buyers. So that really opens up an opportunity for searchers. And it also brings a great opportunity for the sellers. I mean, I've heard sellers being so happy that they said, I never thought I've been trying to sell my company for 4 or 5 years. And then suddenly this thing called search fund comes around and this guy is, solving my problem. But it also creates really interesting buying opportunities in terms of prices and multiples for the searchers, given the market dynamics. And then they're looking, to grow these companies to the next stage where then they really become attractive to potential strategic and financial buyers. And then you're not only generating returns from this growth that you're creating in the company, but also from a natural multiple expansion from taking the companies to the next level, both in terms of size as well as governance and professionalism.
Great. You mentioned a couple of things there, which leads really nicely into the next question. What companies make the best targets? Is it industry specific? You mentioned the types of companies and where they are in their life cycle, succession plans, etc. But are there certain industries or companies that in verticals that work well for these as acquisitions?
So we tend to be extremely agnostic. There is, though, kind of a cake mix that we use, a magical formula, which is not so secret. It's not like Coca-Cola's formula, but we're not looking to do any sort of distress or special situations deals here. So we're looking for companies in attractive industries and sectors that have growth perspectives, that have been growing at some steady pace, that have a solid EBITDA margin of at least 15%ish, that have a good perspective in terms of recurring revenues. So us investors have a better, or at least have more comfort when generating projections for the future for these companies. And lastly, that don't have a lot of CapEx necessities. So as long as you find companies that fulfill these criterias, or most of these criterias, we tend to be agnostic in terms of sectors. But if you look at in the short future, history, most of the companies that we've been seeing is an increasing trend in software companies. The SaaS model is something that really fits well into the search fund, what we're looking for in the search fund world, and also services in general. Where you have this CapEx light business model with high recurring revenues. So those tend to be, the main spotlights in terms of industries. But there's always pleasant surprises, and there's always things that jump outside the box. And it's one of the things that most fascinates me about the search fund ecosystem.
We're going to have to definitely talk about how we can improve banking together after this. There's a lot to be done out of that, I'm sure. No, really interesting. What makes a bad target? We talked about the good ones. What makes a bad target?
So I'd say that a bad target, one of the main things that define a bad target, we call it rocket science, but it's when you're buying a company that is really hard to operate, or has some sort of really specific technology that has to be updated ever so recently, or has some sort of key person inside the company that is leaving. So, the searcher is coming in without having that much experiences, and the person that made the company get to where it is today is leaving. Companies that are operating in sectors with very low barriers to entry and kind of big competitors, that don't have a lot of differentials. Those are also not in our top of mind targets. And generally companies, once again, with high capex and a lot of churn in terms of customers. Those are some of the things that we run away. We're looking for good, sound businesses in interesting sectors that are maybe slagging in growth because the founder, the current leadership doesn't want to take it to the next level, and we're boosting it with energy from recently graduated MBAs, which really want to take it to the next level, and that's where we generate value.
Got it. Love that. So you've acquired the company. Do you add expertise there? Are you able to help them go through the M&A process? Do you find the lawyers for them, or do you work with the same people over and over again? What's that process like?
Yeah, so part of the magic of the search fund model is having a group of investors that are experienced with investing in search funds and are really familiar with the model and know how the process works, because the searchers really rely on their investors to help guide them through the process from day zero to the last day where the company is sold. And what we always look for when we're investing in search funds is a diversified investor base, because we've labeled different types of investors that have different types of expertises. And we always want to make sure that searchers have, they have kind of like the search fund guru, then they have the local guru, which really understands the region in which they're operating. Then they have the sector guru, which is someone that has deep knowledge of that specific sector of the company that they're acquiring. So, that's that backup of the investors, which generally end up forming the board of observers. So you generally have maybe 10 to 15 investors, and then 3 or 4 of those are going to become board members of the company, and those will be even more hands-on. But the idea is, to have a really constructive base of everyone rowing towards the same direction and pushing the searcher to get to the ultimate goal.
Really interesting. I love that approach. One of the things that I've been talking about with my friends in the industry, especially around VC, is this move from VC to VE, which is venture equity, which is far more founder-led. And you see some obviously very successful founder-led VC firms. It sounds like that's more of the approach that you're taking with this, where you're going to be getting in, almost actively investing into these startups. And I love that. And obviously backing that kind of linchpin isn't too dissimilar to that private equity model, where they bring in an expert to run the company or to organize the company, right? But we haven't seen it in these smaller companies before. And these smaller companies, just because they're not, generating hundreds of millions of dollars, doesn't mean that they're not great companies, as you said earlier. They just need to have that kind of inflection, maybe modernization, maybe that inflection of energy to get them to that next level. Creativity, right? Take the blinkers off for a bit. I love that. But obviously do it in an organized way as well. I mean, obviously that's important. So we've talked about the entrance. There's 2 ways we could take this. We could talk about a success story, and then that gives you kind of the chance to go through the exit, or do you want to go what a traditional exit looks like for these guys first? You tell me.
Yeah, so us at Spectra, we are very LATAM focused, where we've been investing for 7 years in search funds in LATAM, where there aren't a lot of exits regionally. Most of the exits are in the US or in Europe. The trend is generally, you buy the company, you operate it for maybe 4, 5, 6 years, and then you look for this sale, full sale. Obviously, there's some exceptions. Sometimes there's a sale from the original investors, but the CEO, the searcher wants to remain as a CEO. There's a lot of flexibility regarding the exit, but despite not having a lot of exits down here, we have a couple of very interesting cases, and maybe mentioning Agazus, which was our first investment. So we say we're a little bit spoiled. Nowadays it's called Vogue, but it's a company that we invested in 2018. At the time, it generated something around $1.5 million in EBITDA, and it was a very interesting thesis. The company is a hardware as a service company, which basically leases computers and iPads and cell phones to clients, to large B2B clients, with a huge layer of services on top of that. And we went from $1.5 million in EBITDA to something like probably $50 million that we should deliver this year. So, wow. Making very relevant acquisitions. We bought the largest player in the market in the middle of the way, with 2 phenomenal searchers, Joao and Rene, which are, outstanding cases. And we're very happy with our case there. So, despite not having the sale, we're eventually starting to think about exit channels, and the horizon seems very, very attractive. We have other companies, where we're more dividend distribution focused. So companies where we've already received our capital back from dividends, and are also looking for a sale, maybe not in the same magnitude, but also with very attractive returns. So in general, we're very satisfied with what we've seen, what we're seeing in the region. And as I speak to my peers, to other global investors from the US and elsewhere, it's become very clear that LATAM and emerging markets is a very interesting space for search funds to act. And I've been seeing more and more international investors and the likes of the largest and most renowned names in the search fund worlds more and more present down here and in other regions of the world, given that they're seeing the same opportunity as we are seeing.
Excellent. A couple of things to unpack there. You mentioned earlier that you are bringing really quality investors in. Obviously, you have experience as well within Spectra of doing a lot of the deals that you've been talking about. How do you find external investors, and what do you get from them from a commitment? And it might not just be expertise, but like from capital. How do you manage those conversations, and what happens if you need more outside of the initial investment?
So what happens there is generally for the search phase, there's a niched group of investors, which are the search fund, call it the serial investors, which these are us and some other local and international groups. We're the ones funding the search phase. But when it comes to the actual company, we at Spectra, search funds is a portion of what we do. We have more than 600 underlying portfolio companies and a vast network here. So what we do is we say, okay, this is the company we're looking at. Let's reach out to our network and try to find people that really are industry experts. And we show them the opportunities, and we're looking to bring these people aboard, not only with their capital, but with their knowledge. So I always mention to our searchers that one of the board seats always has to be of some sort of like industry expert, someone that has done something very similar to what that company does before, because it may be relatively easy to understand what the company does, but there's so many lessons learned, that there's so much value that these external industry experts bring to the table, that when you're able to bring their knowledge along with their capital, which translates to alignment, for us it's a home run.
Excellent. The other part that you mentioned there is obviously the success stories and actually generating dividends along the way and getting your money back over the time. That seems to be a perfect situation. What other ways have you been able to monetize these companies, building ecosystems, etc.? And obviously you've got 600 portfolio companies there. Have you found that there's an opportunity to bring these companies in and to bleed them in across all of your portfolio or some of your portfolio companies?
We're working on that, and I think it's a work in progress. We've seen some very interesting examples. So I think with Agasus or now Volk, it was very clear the synergies of how we were able to help them and some of our other companies. So it was completely symbiotic, spreading them and helping them to reach our network of invested companies. And that's one of our main incentives and actually objectives here in Spectra, is developing this ecosystem between our companies and involving and plugging our search deals within the whole ecosystem. And I think that can be a very interesting opportunity for, call it, the next cycle of development of the asset class in the region and for Spectra as a firm.
Excellent. You mentioned earlier that this is applicable, obviously, across the US and Europe. It's been done there. LATAM it's still new in LATAM, and you're one of the first people to do this. You've seen success, but you haven't had those exits yet. Where else do you think this model works? Maybe it's across LATAM. Can you maybe go over a little bit more detail as to where you're looking within LATAM, which regions you're specifically looking at, and maybe outside of LATAM as well?
Yeah, so we've in LATAM we've done Brazil, we've done Mexico, we've done Colombia. We actually recently closed our first deal in Paraguay, which is a funny story. We've been trying to find something to do in Paraguay for years, and curiously, what gave us the first investment opportunity that really made sense for us was a search fund based in Paraguay that recently acquired a chemical distributor for the agribusiness. So very happy there. Very cool story. We looked into Peru, we looked into Chile, we even looked into Argentina, but things, unfortunately, on the macro side went a little bit sour there. So I think that the region has been growing as a whole, despite Brazil and Mexico being the clear leaders. But as we look towards the rest of the world, we see some interesting trends of the first search fund in Vietnam, which just knocked on our door, mainly because one of the searchers, curiously, is Brazilian. So the first search fund in Vietnam, the first search fund in South Korea, the first search fund in Tunisia, the first search fund in Egypt. So we start seeing it really blossom in some less developed economies. Not that South Korea is not that developed, but on countries that, weren't in the map. And we think that this is just the beginning. I went to the Search Fund conference some years ago, and you saw that it was it was earlier, and a more incipient asset class. Last year in the last conference, it was amazing, just the amount of people that were in Barcelona and the whole noise around it. And you see it in the news, you see with people calling. I think it's just the beginning of a very interesting dynamic that we think is going to happen globally, and that's what we're looking to position ourselves into. We've done Latin America up to now, and the plan is eventually we're obviously preparing ourselves, structuring it, but thinking about maybe this is something that we can act globally and help potential entrepreneurs on a global scale, given that there is kind of a recurrent formula and a recurrent model and some very systematic strategies and policies that you can put in place, that have delivered very attractive returns historically throughout the world, and we believe that they will continue to do so in the future.
I love it. And you're at the end of the day, you're running your own global expansion project, right? I mean, at the end, there's no difference between really running a business, expanding and landing into new offices, new opportunities, and which is what you're asking probably a lot of your searchers to do, right? Land and expand, create a business, and now you have to do the same thing. Maybe you'll have to get those guys to help you.
I wouldn't go as far as saying there's no difference. I'd say there's less difference on the business side, and that's why we're always, as I mentioned, the blend between the investor base. So always have local partners, and when we know we have the local partners that understand the geography, that understand how it is to do business in that specific region or country, then we can bring in the expertise of analyzing businesses, understanding financials, understanding all the different metrics, and comparing it to what we've done up to now, which we think brings a lot of value to the table.
All right, final question. Where can people find out more about you, about search funds, and ultimately apply for this?
So I'd say that there's not like a website where there's a formula where you're applied directly. To learn more about Spectra, and what we do, you can access our website, spectrainvest.com, or even send me an email directly at as@spectra.com. For those interested on the search fund model, there's a primer which is published by Stanford in their website. It's a free download. It's kind of like the holy grail for search funds. It's probably the first document that anyone interested in search funds reads before they reach out. And essentially, you have to start looking for people that have done or that have created search funds before. This is one of the coolest things of the environment. It's a very collaborative environment. Searchers are always willing to speak to people that are interested in opening their search funds. Investors are always having their doors open to listen to potential pitches, and look around, and you'll see that the receptiveness from the ecosystem and from everyone involved is something that I had never witnessed before in my prior career in private equity, and it's one of the things that makes me most passionate about search funds.
Excellent. Alex, this was an absolute pleasure. Thank you for taking me through this. I'm a novice. I'm very ignorant when it comes to this, but I'm absolutely fascinated by the vehicle and the model. I can see why you've been so successful, and I'm sure you will be for years to come. Thanks again for sharing.
Are you thinking about starting a search fund, Ashley?
Maybe. We'll have to talk about that another time. But yeah, absolutely fascinating. Thanks very much for your time.
Awesome. The pleasure was mine. Have a good one, Ashley.
Cheers. There you have it. In this episode, I got to learn more about how search funds operate and what investors consider when deploying capital into them. I felt Alex did a wonderful job of explaining the nuances of the strategy and the benefits to both the searcher and the funds that are deploying the capital. I'm personally fascinated by this type of vehicle and can see why people are gravitating towards them. I'm sure there are a number of investors out there that will be investing in these types of funds for years to come, as well as a number of experienced individuals that are looking to acquire and grow companies to effectively utilize their untapped knowledge. If you'd like to learn more, feel free to check out our blog based on the episode titled The 6 Things You Need to Know About Search Funds. The links for this article are in the comments below. We'll see you next week.